Good to see you. You look well.
It's on your right, guest of honor. Please from my backwards stand.
Right. Also, that's not to be this, but like that's not even how that works.
Good evening. Yeah. Welcome. We are so excited to have you here. I'm Kathleen Jabs. I'm the Special Assistant for Military and Veteran Affairs at the College of William and Mary. My background, I'm retired Navy, so I appreciate a good Army story. And I also worked as the Acting Secretary for Veterans and Defense Affairs for the Commonwealth of Virginia. I've been at William and Mary for a year and a half now and absolutely love it. We have such a tremendous opportunity to help military and veteran students and to forge connections across the campus. We have such great partners like the library that we do programs with. We work with the Army ROTC and the Army in the arts and sciences. We work with the data center and the new cyber exciting things there. And we really serve veterans where they are. So we have undergraduates that a lot of people don't realize, they're coming in as undergraduates at 30 with pets and kids and commutes. They're not living in the dorms, sometimes even homelessness. We had one who lived in a car for a semester. So we kind of wrap our arms around them and show them this public university is here, especially for those who served. William and Mary's legacy of service began before we were even a country. Some of the first William and Mary students left, put down their quills, and went to Yorktown. So the Army, a lot of the initial Army training camps were done on the parade field in now the Sunken Garden, William and Mary. So there's so much history there. And that's why having this opportunity to have the Fight the Night and that legacy of service that book entails and walks through is just incredible. The author, John, to be able to go, or Paul, I'm sorry, go back and read your father's notes and to understand and do that. We have Secretary Gates, who's our chancellor, Secretary of Defense for 2 terms under both presidents. He guides all our military, veteran, and affairs efforts. So we continue to look for ways to improve military and veteran experience and having authors and partnerships with people like the library. And I'm proud to introduce Dr. Carrie Cooper, the Dean of our libraries and the architect of tonight's program.
Thank you. It's really an honor to be here. It's so nice to finally meet Paul. We have been corresponding by email and we got a chance to sit down together last night for the first time. I am the Dean of Libraries. I've been at William and Mary for 13 years. And I always say it's a great day at work when I get to talk to authors and I get to promote books. And I get to read books and then meet the people behind those books. So today's really special for us and for me. I'm going to say a little bit about Paul. I'm going to just do a little short blurb and tell you that Paul is a best-selling author, a journalist, and I'm going to put on my glasses. He's a best-selling author, journalist, and professor. He is a senior lecturer and member of the Department of English at the University of Pennsylvania and a former member of the writing staff at the Washington Post. His books include Sons of Mississippi, A Story of Race and Its Legacy, for which he received the National Book Critics Circle Award and the Chicago Tribune's Heartland Prize. He was honored with the 2nd Heartland Prize for Hemingway's Boat, Everything He Loved in Life and Lost. His other books include Seminary, Looking for the Light, The Living and the Dead, Bound for Glory, and Plagued by Fire. Today, Paul is here to discuss his latest book, Fighting the Night, Iwo Jima, World War II and a Flyer's Life. Thank you for being here.
I know you're going to just launch in and ask me anything you want, and I will, in my feeble way, try to respond. I wonder if I could just acknowledge a few people.
I would love for you to acknowledge
Well, I'll acknowledge you first. We had dinner last evenings, Dean of the University Library, so unassuming, we instantly were sitting down as friends, along with Jay Guidemore, who is the director of special collections at William and Mary, and whom I've now known for a couple of years, because I am proud to say my research archives for the 8 books I've written, those 44 odd staple sized boxes that are up on the 3rd floor loft of our home in Philadelphia, they're going to the special collections at William and Mary. And I think the actual transport is sometime this summer. But I said last night to Jay's boss, that would be Carrie, I said, doesn't it always come down to the people? Because there were several other institutions in America, a handful interested, but William and Mary was Jay convinced me that William and Mary was the place, and it was the grace and the character and the decency of Jay himself. So now I've embarrassed him, I've embarrassed Carrie. Let me embarrass a few others quickly. My son Matt is here. I'm going to talk about him in a second. When we had our first event a month ago, Matt said, "Dad, when you start talking to them, they want to get to the content pretty fast. Don't really make it long." So Matt, I can hear you already. So speed it up, Dad. Speed it up. This is not in any particular order, but I want to acknowledge one student of mine from the University of Pennsylvania, Jessica Goldstein, who's a Washington journalist. She's here tonight. She's a prize-winning Washington journalist, writing as a contributor to the Washington Post, to Washington Magazine, a lot of other magazines in New York. I'm so proud to have worked with her. She graduated in 2011. We were in several workshops together. We've stayed in touch. I'm so proud of you, Jess. The surprise for me, well, next, there's a gentleman here. I'm embarrassing him. His name is Chris Wood. We've just met tonight, but like you and I, we've had correspondence. Chris has the best job in America. He is president of Trout Unlimited, which is the major conservation organization in the United States for the preservation of trout and pure water trout streams. And I invited Chris, and here he is. I think he's got his fishing pole over in the corner, his fishing rod. Chris lives here, and I'm honored that he came. I am most honored, however, that my son and grandson showed up. I did not know they were coming tonight, and here they are. My son, Matt, our older son, lives here and is director of real estate advertising for Washingtonian Magazine. He's the reason Washingtonian continues to exist. And I have 2 grandsons. I have Jackson and I have Teddy. Jackson is 8, and Fighting the Night is dedicated to Jackson Palmer Hendrickson and Teddy Hendrickson. So my 2 grandsons, this is a 4-generation book. My dad, me, my generation, my sons, Matt, and my grandsons. It's a 4-generation male book. But Jackson is here, and among other things, he's a 2nd grader at Lafayette Elementary here in the district. He's a star baseball player. They just had, they were in the championship for the Little League in Upper Northwest just this week. And they lost for the championship by the narrowest of margins. But man, were they heroic. And his mom and I were cheering them on all the way. So I had said to Matt, I'm doing an event with William and Mary. And, Matt's got 18 things going on every hour, and here they show up tonight. So I'm so proud that you're here. Jackson may turn out to be a writer. He and I have already written a few little stories together. Carrie, fire away.
So it's a little intimidating to be interviewing a journalist. I will just say that. I'm gonna do my best. But this particular part of the book in the front really struck me because these are your words, and I know that you wanted the people, the readers in your book, to really consider how the veterans and their family, how that experience as a veteran impacted their own families. And I just want you to know that it very much did that for me. And so I thought I would start with telling you a little bit about me. So that's my dad's parents. That's my grandma and grandpa Zabrowski. My grandmother, that's my grandfather served in World War II in Korea and Vietnam. He's buried at Arlington, and he is with my grandmother, whose dress was made of his parachute. Yeah, the silk parachute. That was her wedding dress. And then in the middle, and I didn't correct it, that tank was in Germany. That's my dad's tank with my name on it. And yeah, Carrie Lynn is my name, and his name on the top. I thought maybe that teddy was for his dad, but he said it was for him. It was his name. That was what they called him. And then that's my parents at a Florida National Guard conference in Orlando, Florida in 1982. And you talk about 1982 a lot in your book.
With my father
Yeah.
in Orlando in 1982.
Yeah.
I'm so moved by these pictures. I didn't know these were coming. Aren't we suckers for these old photos?
Yeah.
I know a lot of you have them in some way. Yeah, we're suckers for them.
And so I actually have my cousin Dakota in the room. That's also Dakota. So that's Dakota's uncle, my dad, and Dakota's grandparents as well. Her sister goes to the University of Pennsylvania. It's in graduate school right now. And so I will say that
6 degrees of separation.
I know.
We're all related here some way tonight.
So your story and your
Go back to that quote just for half a second.
yeah.
I mean, this is unscripted. I knew none of this was coming. I have to thank you for putting those words up. Those are the ending words of the prologue. I once saw Gore Vidal at a reading, Gore Vidal, famous novelist, and he said, any writer that reads from his own book is a horse's ass. But I worked hard on that sentence. This book is mostly about my mother and father and the best years of their lives. I nonetheless have a strong hope that if I set it down as conscientiously as I can, you who are reading it will also be able to hear some connecting chords to your own family's history. There's a sentence or two after that, but basically that's the ending of the, and I am just honored that you put that up there, but it's so insightful of you because I think that's the connecting chord to every one of you in this audience, that we all have a link in some ways to our forebears, to our grandfathers, in my case, my father, who did this heroic thing. You know, they did something way, way above themselves. My dad and my mom were such kids, just like the picture of your mom and dad. I mean, this event of world history was thrust on them. They didn't have another choice, but they rose to it. When my mom and dad got married, everything was sped up. Pearl Harbor was bombed, December 1941, and my mom and dad were in a movie theater. They weren't married. He was at the local air base. She was a high school senior. They got married a couple of months later. You know, she was barely 19. She was 8 days, 19. When they said goodbye to each other, I did an interview at noon today with the public radio affiliate in Boise, Idaho. And I was telling this gentleman that, and he said, that's my parents' story too. When my parents said goodbye to each other in a scabby motor court parking lot in Amarillo, Texas, in September 1944, my mother was 21, barely 21, with 2 babies on her hip, one of whom was me. I was 6 months old. She was barely 21, and my dad was 25. And they said goodbye to each other that morning at about 9 o'clock, not knowing if they would ever see each other again. And that's, you know, so we toss about this thing, the greatest generation, and they were flawed human beings, all of them. but they did something way beyond themselves. They did something heroic. And this event was thrust on them. They said, my mom and dad said goodbye to each other. My mom went to Ohio. She left Texas. My father had to return to the West Coast and join his unit. My mom, with another war wife, drove eastward to Xenia, Ohio, where she was born and raised and where she was going to wait out the war, getting down on her knees every night and praying that she wouldn't be a widow by age 21. And, that's, I mean, the same kind of pictures that you were showing me. And so those words, I think, I'm hoping, because if you write a book about your family and your father, it has to hit a kind of a universal note of connectiveness. Those mystic chords of memory have to connect to other people. So I think it was so astute of you. Thank you.
You're welcome. I cried through a lot of the book. It was very emotional for me. And when my aunts actually gave me my grandparents' love letters back and forth from before they were dating when he was training. And I was able to go back and look at those letters. But I was so moved by the fact that you said you would give anything to have those letters.
We have pictures. And the book has 32 photographs, and there were 5 kids in our family, 3 survived. So I have a kid brother who was the only aviator in the family and a sister. They're much younger than I am. So the 3 of us treasure these photographs, not least this one on the cover, but the book is full of photographs. We don't have letters. My mom told me that she wrote to my dad every day that he was overseas. And my dad said that he wrote back to her maybe 2 or 3 times a week. Where are those letters? They're gone. Our family went through a lot of moves, 5 moves in about 3 years after my dad came back from the war. He was a young pilot starting out in the airlines for Eastern Airlines, and he got moved around until we located in Chicago. Maybe they fell through the cracks of time, but I'm haunted. I mean, I'm haunted by so much that I don't know about my father, that I didn't have a chance to ask. Matt, you have to keep asking me before I sail off to eternity. And Jackson, you have to ask your dad as you continue to grow up. I'm haunted by all that I don't know, and yet I got my father's full military file. It was there at the National Military Personnel Records Center in St. Louis. But yeah, we have the photographs and we treasure these photographs. We don't have the letters. So Carrie, I'm so envious of you. You have the letters.
Inscribed letters. I don't have the original letters. But your book made me track down the letters and get permission from my aunts and uncles to perhaps put them in the archives at William and Mary. And I was able to talk about, the power of first person accounts and how important those are and how they'll be used if they're in an archive and we can preserve them forevermore.
They're written in real time.
Yeah.
Those letters my father would have written to my mom in his 8-man officer tent by, low wattage bulbs at a wobbly table, maybe made out of cardboard or something that they fashioned. And my mom would have written her letters from the farm town where she was waiting out the war in Xenia, Ohio. And I have a passage in the book. Maybe I should just, Gore Vidal, don't hate me. So I say that for his part, I picture my dad writing to my mom at wobbly tables under bare bulbs in the ready room on the flight line before a mission. He told me once he played a lot of poker with fellow officers in that large tented space before briefings from the intelligent officers. He said he won a handy pile of cash from those hot games of draw and stud. Like letters home, poker would have helped eat some of the tension. My mother, the great archivist in our family, once told me she wrote to my father nearly every day he was overseas, and that he wrote to her, if not daily, then at least a couple of times a week. I'd never been able to locate even one of those letters. Where is that box? What happened to that box? I picture my mom reading my dad's letters, which she told me were almost always love letters. I picture her placing them in a box in Pop and Nana's home on Mechanic Street in Xenia. Pop and Nana is what I called my maternal grandparents. Pop was my surrogate father while my dad was overseas. I picture her placing them in a box in Papa and Nana's home on Mechanic Street in Xenia. And after she's put Marty and me to bed, she rereads the latest one. Then she puts the lid on the box and turns out the light. Well, where is that box? What happened to that box? That's just one of the things I'm wondering about.
Well, I was struck by generosity of the many people that you interviewed. And though you didn't have the letters between your parents, you had so many people who generously shared things with you.
Yeah, well, you know, this is a book about a son searching for his father. I told the man on the radio today that, in one sense, I feel it's almost not even a book about World War II. It's as if World War II is the secondary character, as if World War II is the stage setting, World War II is the backdrop. The macro story, the real story, is a son searching for his father. I knew my father for 59 years. That's a long time. He was a boy when he had me, and he lived a long life. He died in 2003. So here's a little side fact for you. This book was officially published a little more than a month ago on May 7th. That was the day my father died. He died May 7th, 2003. And we published this book on May 7th, 2024. But it's a son searching for his father. It's something else as well. And Carrie just put her finger on it. I wanted to write about the men in his squadron. I found the last living airman. My father, if he were alive, was born in 1918, he'd be 106. What were the actuarial chances that I could find one person alive from the 549th Night Fighter Squadron? If my dad was a boy over there at 25, Ray Rudkin of East Sacramento, California, was a boy. He was 20. And I found him. I called him up on the phone. It was the middle of COVID. And I'm trembling. I've interviewed and called up a lot of people in my life as a journalist, and I'm trembling. And it's COVID. And I said, is this Ray Rudkin, who was in the 549 Night Fighter Squadron? And he said, that's me. I flew her. I'm here. I'm sitting in the garage trimming my fingernails. And he said, there's an old box here about a foot from where I'm sitting. It's full of letters and documents and metal. Maybe you'd like to see some of them. My doctor wouldn't let me go out and see him because it was in the middle of COVID. I called him every month for the next 9 months until I was able to get out to California. He was 97. You would think somebody 97, their memories would be so hazy. He was a Wisconsin farm boy. And so that had immediate resonance with my own dad, who was a Kentucky farm boy. And he was sharp as a tack. So there's a whole chapter on him called The Last Living Airman of the 549th. And that box was the treasure trove of box. He had the letters. So yeah, I quote those letters. I quote other letters.
I love that. I actually, yeah, I love that chapter. So you've been preparing to tell your dad's story for a long time. I was amazed that you would take notes at that reunion in
82?
82, and that you could find those notes.
So I'm a Washington Post reporter earning my living. My beautiful son, Matt, was 2 years from being born. Jackson was circling around in heaven as an atom, so this is 1982. And my dad was not a reunion guy. And the Black Widow Night Fighter squadrons, not just his squadron, but a lot of the squadrons. This was an elite airplane that came in very late in the war. They were having a convention reunion in Orlando. And I said, Dad, can we go to that? He went for me. He wasn't a reunion guy. He knew that someday I would want to try to write a book about this. And he wanted it to happen, and he didn't want it to happen. He would introduce me to guys down, his old mate. This is 82. This is 4 decades after the war. And he would say, this is my son, Paul. He works for the Washington Post. He's a writer. Don't tell a writer a damn thing. They'll use it on you. But he was proud. He was proud. And I scribbled notes like a madman, Carrie, and I squirreled those notes away. I mean, this book has been germinating. I say at the beginning of the notes in the back of the acknowledgements, I say, this book has been simmering on the back of my iPhone for half a century. And it's true. It's not a terribly long book, but it's been hanging there in one form or another, and it constantly mutated and gestated, but it was hanging there for 50 years. So I'm beyond grateful that it got done at all. It didn't matter, ultimately, if 100 people read it and bought it. I got it done. I'm thrilled beyond thrilled to say that it got done. And I'm thrilled beyond thrilled to dedicate it to my grandson, Jackson, and his brother, Teddy. Yeah, it has been other books got written. I was a Washington Post journalist for 23 years before I pivoted and became a writing professor at UPenn, University of Pennsylvania, and continued writing books. But somewhere this book was always scheming and dreaming itself. I wish it were better. I wish it were better. I'll tell you a story. This came up today in the interview at Boise that I did with. There's a writer I deeply admire. He's been long dead. His name is James Agee. Was a Southerner. Jay Guidemore would know all about this book. The book is called "Let Us Now Praise Famous Men." It's a famous book that was written in the 1930s. A photographer and this writer, James Agee, went to the Deep South and studied the lives of desperately poor sharecroppers, white sharecroppers. And when that book was finished, he wrote a letter to his priest confidant, and he said, it is a sinful book for all that it did not achieve. And I don't know, I tried so hard. It simmered there for 50 years. I'm immensely proud of it, but it's still a sinful book for all it did not achieve.
So I'm curious, what advice do you have for other writers who are thinking about writing such a personal story?
Yeah, memoir is a hard thing. I was just referencing that a moment ago, that if it doesn't hit a universal chord, what good is it? That's why that quote that you put up, I'm just so honored by that. Well, here's what writing is. It's 98% perspiration and 2% inspiration. My advice is, my beloved student, Jessica, knows all about this. My advice is, here's how writing gets done. It's seat of the pants to the seat of the chair. You have to be willing to go in there 6 days a week and stare down your demons of doubt and fear. I once interviewed the great novelist, poet, essayist, Robert Penn Warren. And I said, and he won the Pulitzer Prize 3 times. And I said, Mr. Warren, how were you able to do what you did? He was from Kentucky. And he said, son, I was willing to go naked to the pit daily. Isn't that a great line? Naked to the pit daily. I tell my writing students, Jess, do you remember this? I said, writing is like trying to read Braille on the cave wall of your mind. It's in there. It's in there. And you have to fish it out. The thing that, there's a great poet, W.H. Auden, he said, the thing I cannot find is known to my unconscious mind. And how do you find it? You find it by seat of the pants to the seat of the chair, willing to go in there 6 days a week and do it. And heaven will always exceed your grasp. You're never going to get there. But it's, I say this, I was saying this all spring to my writing students in class this term. I said, it's the trying. It's the trying. So I don't know. That's some advice.
So, how did your family respond to the book? And maybe not just your family, but some of the close friendships and some of your dad's closest relationships, those family members of those who served. How do you let them have a preview before it comes out, or do they see it when everybody else sees it?
They see it when everybody else sees it. But Carrie, you know, she's asking the questions are too good. I mean, you're writing about real people. Man, is that a tightrope? Man, is that a high wire act? You have to write your truths. There's painful stuff in this book. Painful stuff about my dad and my struggle to know my dad and my struggle to get along with my dad. But man, if this book does not come out a tribute, then I have failed. I have failed egregiously. But you are trying to tell the whole story. I said at the end of that prologue, the major key is when these two farm kids from Kentucky and Ohio, my mother's struggle here on the home front, shouldering all those responsibilities, 2 little kids, her husband's overseas. I mean, there's a whole other book to be written about that. That just is shadowy in the book. And my dad's out there in the Western Pacific flying around in the pitch of night. But I am evading skillfully your question, so let me answer it more directly. How was the response? Well, the last living airman of the 549th, this is this guy in East Sacramento. It's a beautiful chapter to him, an homage to him. But there's hard things in that chapter too that he told me. Well, his grown son, who watched over his dad, his grown son is 10 or 15 years younger than I am. He wrote to me and he said, Paul, it's beautiful. So exhale. My Kentucky relatives, I wrote about my father growing up and the hardships of Kentucky and the severe disciplines that were meted out to the children on a sharecropping farm in Kentucky. So I was worried about my dad. My dad had 9. He was one of 9 kids. He was the 3rd born in a sharecropping family of 9 kids. No electricity, no running water. My dad never got outside the county he was born in until he got on a bus at age 18 in 1937 and rode a bus up into Illinois and enlisted in the Army Air Corps. This was way before World War II broke out. My dad was such a provincial kid, and I was worried about how my Kentucky relatives might receive the book. They have received it well. Here's a funny story. My father was, he wanted to fly airplanes. How did that dream ever get in a sharecropping son in Western Kentucky. He was scissoring out pictures of airplanes from the Saturday Evening Post in the 1930s. And one day, crop dusters would fly over and he'd stare up at them. He's sitting on the wagon tongue out in the hayfield. He's supposed to be working. He said that if his father saw him sitting on the wagon tongue, instead of baling the hay, he would have gotten the strap. But he's looking at those crop dusters. And one day, a Ford Trimotor flew over. That was a huge airplane. Ford Motor Company in Michigan had something to do with the making. And he said, it was like a vision. He said, Paul, it shadowed the field. It shadowed me. And he said, it came slowly over. And he said, I could see the pilot up there. And he said, it was as if a ladder was going to drop down and pick me up. So it was like he knew that he wanted to fly airplanes. He told his mom, my grandma Hendrickson was a country woman from Morganfield, Kentucky. He said, I'm going to fly airplanes someday. And she said, Joe Paul, because they all had two names. He was Joe Paul. He was Joe Paul Hendrickson. And my grandma, we were scared to death of her as kids. She said, Joe Paul, he said, I'm going to fly airplanes. She said, Joe Paul, if you want to commit suicide, why don't you just go out there and jump off the barn? So this was the leap my father made through time and space to do what he did. That again is the hero. But, I'm still skillfully evading, not so skillfully, your question. It's such a tightrope, and you so worry that the people you try to do it as sensitively and as conscientiously as you can. You can't say, well, let the chips fall where they may. No. You sweat it out. You sweat it out to tell the truths that you feel have to be told, and being sensitive to all parties. But that's the burden. Jess Goldstein knows everything about that. You're writing about real human beings, and this is not fiction. You're not making this up. So it's very hard.
Well, I'm a librarian, and so I'm really curious to spend a little time on your experience in the archives. And I know that a lot of your work, well, you've done many books, but I'd love to hear how the work of librarians and archivists have impacted in your writing.
God bless the librarians of America.
I love the
I give these long, drawn-out answers. Hey, there's a one sentence answer. God bless the librarians of America. I can say a lot more, but God bless the librarians of America.
I loved the part in the story when you were just going back and forth with this woman. I think
You think she's a woman? I don't identify her.
You didn't.
I say him, her.
I know. I guess.
he.
Okay.
So it's so funny. Here's the story. The luckiest break I've ever had archivally in doing this kind of research. I've been writing books for over 40 years. It's COVID. I was able to get my dad's entire military file, his service record, from St. Louis. That's a story in and of itself. And pre-COVID, when I was finishing another book, I went out to St. Louis. I got all that. I Xeroxed like a madman. But what Carrie is referring to, this is a heck of a story. The major repository of research for the Army Air Forces, the Army Air Corps, the United States Air Force, it changed its name through history, is in Montgomery, Alabama, at the Air Force Historical Research Agency at Maxwell Air Force Base. Again, it's COVID, and I can't go down there. So I'm dialing, I'm calling there. Nobody ever picks up. There's not even a recorded message. 4 months went by, 5 months went by. One day, I'm in the backyard. I idly dialed at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and a voice picks up. And I'm not saying the gender because the person asked me, it was the luckiest archival break I've ever had. The person said, because we got to be quite good working friends. The person, she said, I'm going to help you a lot, and I'm going to help you more than I should, and I'm going to help you some outside my working hours. This person got so invested in my case, in my story. And this person said, but I want to ask you something. I want my name kept out of it. So I say that in the story, that this is the luckiest archival break. I mean, this person, this archivist at the Air Force Historical Research Agency is so wonderful that you automatically think that she is a she. I'm not saying. She picked up the phone at 4 o'clock. By 5 o'clock, had sent me through DoD safe, which is a special Department of Defense safe thing, into my Dropbox file, something like 1,000 pages of documents. I didn't quite get to read them right away, but many of them related to my father's squadron. I mean, the person on the other end of the line, I'm just really working hard not to say the gender, said, do you have, maybe I can help you here. Do you have any reference numbers? Do you have any hits? I had a whole bunch of them. So within an hour, and continued through the life of the project to help me solve different problems related to the research. The luckiest break I've ever had. But, you know, so that's a professional librarian on a national archive level, working for the federal government. Carrie, the local librarians in Champaign, Illinois, which is where my father first enlisted in the Army Air Corps in 1937, in Rantoul, Illinois. That was a local county librarian. That person helped me like you wouldn't believe. So God bless the librarians. God bless the care. God bless the J. Guidemore. You know, and I tried to thank them. I do thank them. You saw that I thanked them.
Oh, yeah.
I thank
Oh, yeah.
them for the immense help. I mean, I've done a lot of these interviews now for the last month and for many of the books before this. But I don't think I know I have never been interviewed by a dean of libraries at a university. So this is a special occasion for me to just babble on my gratitude, because you guys are the unsung heroes.
Wow. The most wonderful job. And you talked a little bit about the fact that you thought so much of Jay, but I think if you could just talk a little bit more of why William and Mary, and what is it that the people that are in your papers in a decade, you know, in actually, we already know there's somebody waiting to get into the papers, right? We talked about that at dinner last night.
Yeah, Jay, what is that?
The two brothers working on the biography of Matt.
Yeah. So I wrote a book about Vietnam, and Robert McNamara, it was 5 books ago. There's a book about Vietnam. And, you know, Robert McNamara is the haunting ghost of Vietnam. He's the architect of the failed policy. He was Secretary of Defense under both President Kennedy and President Johnson. And I really struggled with that book. I gave that book up. I wrote another book in between, but it finally got published in 1996. It's called The Living and the Dead. Robert McNamara and 5 Lives of a Lost War. I gave that book up, and a great feeling of failure. Went back to my job at the Washington Post, asking for my job back. You know, not even sure I could write journalism again. I was so shaken. But that book eventually got published. When that book got started, Matt was an infant of 2 or 3 months. When it got published, and that was 1984. Matt was born in 84, January. When it got published in 1996, Matt was 12. And I brought him to the front of the room at the book party with his younger brother. And I said, people have wondered how long it has taken to write the McNamara Vietnam book. About this big. Matt was 12, and John, our younger son, was 8. But Jay is referring to the fact that there is a new biography being written by two brothers, and they're very, very distinguished. One is an old New York Timesman and the other is a Pulitzer Prize winning academic. They're writing a full new biography of McNamara, and apparently they want to come to William and Mary and comb through the papers some more.
Yeah, they said, they're gonna be ready by the fall.
Get on that, Jay.
Yeah.
The papers are currently, all the research boxes, as I said, are in the attic of our home in the suburbs of Philadelphia, but they are going to be transported down to William and Mary. We think this summer. We hope. My wife is afraid something will happen. Let's get them out of the house and get them down there. But you wondered why William and Mary?
I know that Jay was a big part of that because you connected with him. But you also told me last night that one of the things that he said to you was that the students, we use these as teaching and research materials. We get about 100 classes a year that come in, and we're really, our collections are accessible in a way that I think is very unique. We spend way more time with students and with the public than we do in the back office processing and describing, because we really want people to connect with these documents. There's something very powerful about touching a document and seeing a document. And I gathered that really struck you as
Absolutely. I mean, Matt, to use a Matt metaphor, part of what closed the deal was that Jay, with his personality and his soft approach, helped close the deal. Because other people came to our attic, other institutions, and were looking at these papers. And I didn't know much about William and Mary other than it was a very, very distinguished school. Matt, I think when we were driving around looking at colleges, when you were a high school senior at Georgetown Prep, I think we went to William and Mary. I think we did. They didn't have a golf course, so you weren't.
So that was.
But I want to get serious here. That did. So I have a little dream. Jackson, listen up. I have a little dream that many years from now, when I am an atom up in heaven floating around, that Jackson will find his way to the special collections at William and Mary and open up some of these boxes that his grandfather, the 6 or 7 boxes for a book called Sons of Mississippi, the 7 or 8 boxes for a book called The Living, and look through the interviews, look through the type, and see the struggle that went on. And maybe you would know something that you wouldn't have otherwise known about your grandfather by looking at those boxes. I'll be up in heaven spying on you.
I love that. Thank you. So, Jay, you said last night that this was an incredible collection. I wonder if I could get you to talk a little bit about what you saw when you visited him in his home and why you thought this would be an amazing collection for William and Mary.
Well, I don't know how many hours I spent in your attic. You treated me to some breakfast, I think, and I got to your house. Well, you treated me to dinner the night before, and then I met you early that morning. And you treated me to breakfast, then you showed me the boxes. He had spread out about 40 boxes around the 3rd floor of the office. I pulled out my notebook, my pencil, had my phone ready to go. And you said, okay, let me know if you need anything. And I think you came up just for lunch. So we had spent a little lunch together. And I don't think I left until about 5 o'clock that evening. And I pretty much looked through every box. 20 years ago, I remember seeing the Sons of Mississippi at a bookstore and asking my wife, boy, this would be really nice for Christmas. Of course, I never got it. So I was very excited about that book because when we first talked, I checked it out of the library and I read it over Thanksgiving, and it was like, wow, I should have read this 20 years ago. But because as I started looking through who Paul Hendrickson was, I was like, wait a minute, he wrote Sons of Mississippi, Hemingway Boat. I'm like, okay, this guy's a good, he's been around. He's written some great books. But looking through the Sons of Mississippi, there's letters with James Meredith back and forth. It's not just copies of letters of James Meredith from other institutions. It's actually correspondence Paul had with James Meredith. A very rare edition of a book James Meredith wrote that I think are only in 4 of the libraries of the United States. The, the interview notes with the sheriffs for the picture or their children or grandchildren, and them talking about racism and the growth of racism and you just jotting down their thoughts and ideas. But the notebooks also of your writing experiences. There was a stream of consciousness about you writing and thinking about what it was like to be looking at the store where Emmett Till supposedly insulted the white woman, looking at the river where they pulled Emmett Till out, and you writing your thoughts, the stream of consciousness, and your what you were thinking at that time, and what the weather was like, and how it felt, and what things looked like, and you could really see the creative process. And so those are things that the photographs of Cuba when you went down to visit Hemingway, when you wrote Hemingway's book, the correspondence with who's the photographer, Walcott, Marianne Post Walcott, the correspondence you had with her children and her husband, and correspondence you had with Robert McNamara, interview notes. I mean, it's just amazing at some of the stuff that's in there. And it's just like, this isn't just copies from other institutions of McNamara's letters. These are letters that he's writing to Paul. And I was just like, wow, this is an amazing collection. And it didn't even feel like work. He fed me. I'm up there doing research, going around. And the best thing about it is I don't have to write a paper about it. So I just have to get it into the collection, bring it down. Like I'm going to fly up to Philadelphia, rent a van, drive it back down to Williamsburg. I'll give it to the accessioning archivist and processing archivist, and enjoy looking at it and researching it, sharing with students and all that stuff. For some of the sessions we have on military history at the university, there's going to be just wonderful materials and civil rights. The book on the seminary book, your first book of your experiences in being in the seminary. There's just so many different topics that are covered by these books that will be useful for classes, but also because of so much of like Robert McNamara biographers. They're going to want to come see these files because they know they need to see these files to do their book right. And so I think there's so many different things. Somebody else wants to write about Hemingway, they're going to come down Hemingway because you had correspondence with his children. So there's so much stuff in there that was just made it so much valuable, especially for a historian and books of nonfiction.
You can see why I decided William and Mary was the place. That was eloquent what you said. And Jackson, to pick up what I was trying to say a minute ago, maybe just on the heels of what you, yeah. So I'm interviewing. Sons of Mississippi was published in 2003, won the National Book Critics Circle Award. It's a picture. The whole book derives from a photograph. It's a picture of 7 sheriffs dressed up as if they're going to church. It's a terrifying photograph. And the one in the middle is he's limbering up with a baseball bat. And what they want to do is keep the first African-American, James Meredith, ever to integrate Lily White, University of Mississippi. They're trying. So this was, a huge event in our history in 1962, the integration of Ole Miss by James Meredith. And here are these 7 sheriffs as part of the mob to keep Meredith out. And I saw that photograph and it terrified me because it was so disconnect and disconcert. They're dressed up as if they're going to go to church and they're so vile and menacing and the racism is just seeping out of them. The reason it's called Sons of Mississippi, you can look at those 7 and you who know what they're about, even if you don't know their details. Now, are any of them living? 2 were living when I set out to search that moment, find it. But it's Sons of Mississippi because it's what they passed down. What did they pass down? How did the gene of bigotry mutate as it wound sinuously through the generations? Sons, grandsons, that's what the book is about. My beloved book editor in New York, he looked at that photograph when I was proposing the idea, and he's a good Jewish boy who had grown up in New York City. He didn't know about Southern racism. He knew everything, though, about how you concept and write a book. He drew his finger down the middle of the photograph and he said, Paul, the direction you're trying to go with this book is this way. And he drew it right down and I didn't understand what he meant. And he looked at me and he said, I guess they're children. And the bulb went off and I got the book. So Jackson, maybe someday you would go in when Pop is up in heaven and you would go into those archives, because in interviewing these people and the children and the grandchildren, I'm constantly registering my own doubts and fears and just as Jay said, what the weather is like when I'm standing in front of the grocery store where Emmett Till, you know, that's part of the story. It's kind of where the civil rights movement started when Emmett Till was so brutally murdered in Mississippi. And you can see the writer's struggle of trying to understand the story in real time as it's happening, because you don't understand it while you're just putting down your notes like crazy, typing them out late at night, writing things in the margins. I said, can I tell them about Little Parrot? I think we may have a budding writer here. I don't know how his dad feels about that. Oh, okay. I got a funny. All right. Here's a funny story. My son Matt is the real estate advertising director of Washingtonian Magazine. He was smart. He said, I'll honor my father. I'll go into the journalism. I'll go on to the business side. I'll go to the right side of the masthead. That's where the money is. Our younger son, John Hendrickson, is a staff writer for the Atlantic magazine. He's writing in New York. So I'm honored by the fact that both of my sons are in media. My grandson and I have a little parrot series going. We have Little Parrot Goes to the Pumpkin Patch. We've got little parrot books, and we want to keep these going. So who knows what Jackson's going to turn out. We'll see.
Would you entertain some audience questions?
Yeah, sure. Anybody. Does the president of Trout Unlimited have a question? All right, yeah.
Thank you. Paul, I'm Chloe Phillips, and I appreciate you being here. And Carrie, thank you as well. I'm now a writer, although I've been embarrassed saying that in front of you.
Please.
But I wonder if you have one sentence of advice about this quote, because that's the challenge I find in making a family story broader for other people and not just your family story. And is it the trick, putting it in a context? Is it, what would you say is the best advice as I bumble along with that?
Good question. God is in the details. It's almost a paradox, a contradiction. If you so particularize your own family's story, and if you are faithful enough to it and true enough to get down every possible detail, selective detail, not every detail, selective detail, somehow or other, that I think will hit the mystic chords of memory. Carrie, you said that you shed some tears reading this book and instantly began looking up your pictures and getting a hold of these letters and now getting the actual letters. This sounds self-serving, so please, I don't mean it to be, but I wonder if you would have been moved to do that if the book hadn't felt like it was telling in some weird way, speaking in some weird way to your own family. So my advice is you drive the pile as deep as you can. Pile drive it deep to know every possible detail you can. I'm pretty obsessive about the researching. And then if it becomes so real and authentic, I think it's going to, it's that funny paradox, that contradiction. The deeper you go with your own story, it begins to feel so authentic and so real that it speaks to you about your memories. I was speaking to a woman out in the hall here. I'm looking for her face. The West Virginia. You told me that story about I was describing my Kentucky grandmother who in the Kentucky heat would roll her nylons down below her ankles and take her dress and fan herself with her dress. And
I'm related to her too.
I'm sorry, what's your first name? Barbara said, oh my God, I read that. And I was instantly back in West Virginia with my people. Another question?
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Amy and I used to work with Special Collections with Jay actually. And thank you so much.
A little closer to my fading ears.
I'm Amy. I used to work with Jay at Special Collections. And thank you so much for being here. I was wondering if you ever faced any resistance from people when you were asking for their documents, because you're writing about real life people and their descendants. Did they ever feel like this was private information? Because I write about real life people too, but they're from the 1790s and like they have nothing to say.
Everybody got to laugh at the last part, and I missed that. What was that, Matt?
I said I write about real life people too, but they're from the 1790s, so they don't have anything to say.
Lucky.
You know, I said, God bless the librarians. Who are these people that I search out? And I'm not talking about my family members, I'm just the parts of the book that have to do with men who were in my father's. Why should they have trusted me? Why? I call them up. And you register your authenticity. You register your earnestness. That can't be faked. It can't be faked. And then they start trusting you. And my God, are you going to betray them once they start telling you these really inner secrets that they may not quite realize that they are telling you this one? So this is this tightrope you're on. You know, it's a moral equation calculation that you have to make when you're a nonfiction writer, to protect people and to tell the story to the utmost of your life. Matt and I have had many discussions about this. I mean, we, in other contexts, and you know, that would be a whole other conversation we could have, but it's a real, I faced it all the time as a journalist. You are so accountable. You write a story in the Washington Post, you better be on the money. You better be, and you know, the old famous thing is you go interview the congressman, and I didn't have to do too much of that. I was a feature writer, but you go interview the congressman and the congressman says something revealing, and then he's instantly worried about it. So it's on the record. He didn't say this is off the record. He didn't say this is between us. He said it for the interview. He said it in the interview. He said it as part of the interview. He said it for the record. So then the congressman is very worried about this. So he has his administrative assistant pull you up the next day and try to wedge you to, well, he's asking you to take that part out. I'm sorry, I can't do that. It was on the record. But, you know, gosh, here's a quick story. Bob Woodward, pretty famous guy here in America. He's coming out with a new book, by the way, on war. He's one of the most famous nonfiction writers in America. Well, he's been all these decades at the Washington Post. I certainly knew him, wasn't an intimate friend of his, but knew. I was at a lunch with him up on the 8th floor in the executive suite with Katharine Graham and about 8 or 10 other reporters. She would invite reporters up to have lunch in the executive suite. And I was sitting across the table from the famous Bob Woodward. And everybody's just making chit chat. And I said, Bob, I saw you on Larry King a couple nights ago, and you were ticking off the absolute requirements to be a great journalist. And I said, you didn't say the word, Larry King asked him, what are the 8 most important things a journalist has to have? And I said, Bob, you ran through the list. I didn't hear the word compassion. And he said, Paul, it doesn't make the list. It makes my list. It makes my list. Um,
Hello, I'm Shannon Watson. I was class of '89 at William and Mary.
Yeah.
And I'm just recently finished my tenure on the libraries board. So this is,
Thank you for coming.
thank you. Thank you for being here. My question is more about your story. I obviously have not read your book yet. And I'm curious as to what made you decide to pick the story about your father in the war as the particular piece of your father's history about what you wanted to write.
Well, that's a great question. And all these questions have been great. And I have a feeling that even though we have a modestly sized group tonight, this is a really attentive group and an attentive audience. Inspired here, I think, by just the genuine down-to-earthness of which I immediately saw last night, of our moderator and Jay. So thank you for that question. Well, I think I recognize this as a story way, way back. I said 50 years hanging on the back of my iPhone. I think here would be maybe a little part of it. There's many little tentacles here. Would I have been able to do something like my father did? He was 25. Yes, this thing was thrust upon him. And he was he was an actor in his own history. He was he knew, you look at these pictures, look at this photograph in the cockpit. He's turned. Is he going up tonight? I don't know. There's no date on the back of the picture. This is taken in the daytime. He's got a half smile on his face. He's aware of who he is, but he's also pushing down the fear. I looked at that 25-year-old and I think I was wondering, what is your first name, please? Shannon. Could I have been that brave? Could I have done something like that? Could I have, when faced with the moment of calling, a moment of, this is your destiny? Would I have been capable at 25? I was picking my nose at 25. What was I doing at 25? I had finished graduate school, I guess. I don't think I'm being falsely modest, Shannon, in saying I'm not sure I could have risen to that moment, let alone the moment my mother rose to, shouldering all the burdens here. So I think I wanted to get to the bottom of understanding how and why he was able to do this, how and why. And, you know, my father and I had a difficult relationship in many ways. There was a distance there. He was always happier up there in his wild blue yonder. That makes me sad to say. And I think I wanted to grasp onto him. And I wanted to, if I knew this man for 59 years, in another way, I never knew him. I didn't know him at all. So the writer's quest was to, who was my father? I knew him for 59 years. I knew him intimately. In another way, I didn't know him at all. So that propelled me as a writer to try to get to the bottom of his story. And did I get to the bottom of his story? No. I got edges and pieces. That's all. And that's all you can ever get out of any book, I think. I tell my writing students at Penn, I say that whenever I am in mind of all the times that I have tried to write something, I am more in mind of all the times that I have failed at writing. It's the most humbling act I know. It's the most difficult act I know, other than trying to be a good father and trying to be a good husband. It comes in third. It's so damn difficult. I bet I didn't answer your question.
You did, thank you.
I just have a quick comment and then a question, Paul. I just finished reading Hemingway's Boat, which is one of Paul's books. And if you haven't read it, it's just stunning. And I'm so glad you made that comment about compassion, because it's less about the treatment of Hemingway's life than the compassion that you showed for his son, for the fella and his wife who worked for Hemingway for a year on the boat or a summer on the boat. But my question is, on behalf of the 7 million fly fishers in America, when are you going to write your treatise on fly fishing?
So I'm honored that Chris Wood is here tonight, and we met tonight for the first time in person. I wrote him a fan letter. So I'm a fervent member of Trout Unlimited. You want to see my membership card? It's in my wallet. And I get the magazine. It's everybody knows about the Sierra Club. This Trout Unlimited is the great conservation organization. And because where else would it be based but here in America? Here in Washington, D.C. Chris was going to take Matt and I shad fishing on the Potomac at Fletcher's Boathouse in April, and I was not feeling so well, so I missed out on that trip. He invited me, but I wrote him a fan letter this winter because I had been reading the president of the organization writes a president's newsletter or writes a president's feature. He's always so damn humble in his, he's like, fly fishing can be a snob thing. It's full of elitism. Chris doesn't strike me that way at all. He's just he's a fisherman who wants to catch fish. And so I wrote him a fan letter. He wrote me back and we began this correspondence and we met tonight. But Chris, I sent you the one piece I ever tried to write about fly fishing, and it was published in the Washington Post, and it's been anthologized in a few books. And I think that's it, Chris. I don't want to try again. I don't want to press my luck. I'll let you keep doing it.
Time for one more.
Here comes my son, Matt. Here comes, yeah. Matt's the closer. He closes deals. Let's get the closing.
It's funny you say that. This is more of an idea, but the way my brain works kind of just tries to put together little things that I gather and come up with a solution. But it seems to me there's a little bit of we're not quite sure when and how the papers are going to make their way down. And you and I have this great history of road trips. And I have this new truck that I just got as part of my Little League persona. And we have on our calendar a tentative idea in late July for you and I to go to William and Mary for you to show me the whole university and where the papers will be. What if, and I don't know if the crowd would get behind this, what if we delivered them and we were back on the road and it was a father-son thing and William and Mary will pay for the gas? And
William and Mary will pay for the gas.
And we'll arrive like the Beverly Hillbillies with 60 boxes.
And the barbecue along the way.
Right,
And
right.
just last week. So Matt, yes, tell them about this truck. Tell them about this thing.
Covered truck?
Tell them.
You're evading the question. I think the real question is, are you in? Are you in?
Hey, but last week, Matt let me drive the truck. He just got this truck. It's the world's biggest truck. What is that damn thing?
Ram 1500. It's
Oh, wow.
baseball gear.
Yes. But we went out to Maryland and you got some fancy top on it, Jay, to protect the boxes so that if it rains, yeah. I know Matt, I drove Matt out there. He bought the truck a couple weeks ago, but then he had it outfitted with this top that goes across. And he said, you have to drive it. It's not really, and I was so terrified of driving this thing. It looks like an 18-wheeler. It looks like a big rig. What a great idea.
Yes.
Can Jackson come along? Hey, Jay, you don't even have to fly up and pay for we got to get some workers though to take them out of the third floor.
It's sort of wondering how this boxes down from the third floor. I can't do it.
I think 60 boxes would fit in that truck. It's not 60 actually. It's in the high 40s, middle to high 40s. And the research boxes for the current book, for this book, I need to hang on to for another year or so. And because when people start challenging me, how is this true? I have to have my access to my notes. So those will eventually come to the university, but not right now.
And when I go down, we'll say, we moved these here. You know, I remember the day we loaded them in.
That's part of the story.
Part of the story.
And when we made a visit to William and Mary last fall, Jay took me to a world-class barbecue joint in Williamsburg. What's the name of that place? All right, so Matt, we got the barbecue. Do you all want to come? You'll have to, we'll run a Greyhound or something.
Wear work clothes.
So I've been doing these events now for a month and it's about to calm down. We're going up to Maine next week, my wife and I. She would have been here, but she has an event in Philadelphia she had to go to tonight, but it's calming down now. And I have to say, this is the most fun one I've had. You all are just folks. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for coming. Enjoy some refreshments and each other, and we hope to see you at another program soon.